Curtis, I'm going to read your question one more time. Curtis says, managing one's state of being is tough to stay in the groove. Why is that state so difficult to maintain? Slipping into careless, lackadaisical, or slipping into trying too hard and becoming tense? So it is a really, really good question, and it is very tough to stay in that state of mind. And the reason for that is because in order for that to happen, it's not a thing that we can say like, okay, I feel this way and I just have to do this one thing and then I'm locked in like that for the rest of the day. That's not how that works. In order to maintain that state of presence and that correct state of being, you can call it being in the zone, you can call it being whatever it is that you want to call it, existing in that space is a holistic experience of how your physical body feels, and will include your eyes. Obviously that's part of your body, but a lot of times I like to separate that. It's the physical state of your body and how it feels, but also your consciousness. And so the problem is that both of those things are continuously getting external stimuli coming at them all day long. And one little change to either of those systems can pull you out of that state that you're trying to be in. So in order to stay in it, it requires a balancing act of constantly changing variables when you start to notice something getting too far in one direction. This is like a very simple analogy, but I really like the visual that it gives. I was on a group video call with a student once. It was myself, a student of mine, and Henry Hopking. And Henry made the analogy of stating that you have to imagine that there's all these cogs on the wall, and you have to always be changing all of the different dials. And the progression from start to finish of the round has you influencing all of those things. And I really like that because it is really, really true. It's like when you start to notice one of these things that influences your physical state or your consciousness, then you have to do something to either ramp something up or dial something back. And I'm being vague here on purpose because it literally is, unfortunately, an infinite field of things that you have to master control over, and an infinite field of things that influence you. So when you look at it that way, it seems really overwhelming and intimidating, because you think, my God, I have to have this checklist of all these things I gotta constantly check to see if they're getting out of tune, and I have to work this cogwheel wall. But if you look at it that way, it is overwhelming. It's way too much. And this is why I talk about self-awareness over and over and over again. I beat it into the wall, because without a level of mindfulness, meaning an understanding of your consciousness in real time, how are you thinking? What are you thinking about? What filters are your thoughts going through? How are your thoughts influencing your emotions? How are your emotions influencing your thoughts? All of those things. Without that level of mindfulness to understand that in real time, we don't have the information to strategically change what we're doing to combat those things. And then without a level of physical self-awareness, which would be literally doing something as simple as just being able to feel your body, we don't have the ability to understand how our body feels. And it sounds really dumb, and almost maybe every single person listening to this may think that it's like, I can easily feel my body. How would I not know when I'm getting tense? Or how would I not know when I'm like locked up and nervous and whatever it is? The problem exists in the fact, and this is where it really answers your question a lot better, Curtis, but I had to give that foundational summary down, because The problem that our game of clay shooting creates, which makes it a beautiful game, is the fact that what a mastery and performance of clay target shooting requires is that heightened level of mindfulness and understanding your consciousness, and a heightened level of attentive awareness of your body. You have to be able to use that to understand where you are and make decisions and control your movement. But in order to break a target, you can't exist in that space at all. So this is why it's so hard to do what you said, which is managing your state of being, and it's hard to stay in the groove because the very act of participating in the sport forces you to lose awareness of the things that you need to do in order to manage your state of being. And the way that that happens is that we go into the neurology again of the way that the eyes work and understand how proprioceptive movement is the best way to shoot a bird. Everybody completely misunderstands me in thinking that they call the way that I shoot the proprioceptive method. No, that's wrong, because every person shoots proprioceptively. That's not my mechanics. By definition, mechanics cannot be proprioceptive. So it doesn't matter what your movement or mechanics are that you use to connect to a bird. It's proprioceptive if you do it correctly. That's your best shot of breaking the bird, because proprioceptively connecting to a bird is the equivalent of saying, I'm not going to determine a lead, determine where I need to put the gun, and put it there and pull the trigger. That's the opposite of proprioceptive shooting. Every person tells you, look at the bird, every coach. So obviously they know that it's important to look at the bird, let the body do the work, shoot it subconsciously. Well, in order to do that, we need to engage in smooth pursuit ocular movement. Smooth pursuit ocular movement requires conscious attention to the target. The target is extraceptive. It's outside of you. Using and paying attention to your vision is extraceptive. It's one of the five senses. But the thing required to manage your state of being, to stay in the groove, is self-awareness, which is all intraceptive. So that's where the problem is that if we allow our consciousness to go unchecked, if we don't have a cue in there to say, let's just pull us back to being intraceptive for just a little moment before we shoot this next pair, then what ends up happening is you start to compound the place that you're existing in the extraceptive spectrum, and you get further and further and further and further away from being intraceptive. And eventually you get to a threshold where you are so extraceptive that you don't realize that you're not intraceptive. And at that moment, all of your attention and your thoughts and your reactions are all based on things outside of you, and you will not be able to pay attention to your own body. And if you don't know what I'm talking about or have never experienced this in shooting before, it's the exact same thing that happens if you're really focused on work and you forget to eat. There's so many examples of this where just you're doing something and you don't pay attention to yourself. Either that you don't notice that you have to go to the bathroom until you think about it, or any of those things. That is going deep into an extraceptive spectrum and losing intraceptive self-awareness of your body and your thoughts. So in order to do the correct thing to break the bird, we have to do the opposite thing that's required to make a plan and assess what we need to do to break the bird. Basically, the reason why it's so easy to lose being in the groove is that if you are feeling your body move and paying attention to how it feels and what your thoughts are while you're shooting a tournament target, even if you hit it, you'll hit it incorrectly. It's not a good shot because you're consciously going to be moving the gun. We need to be able to learn not to feel the body in the shot in a tournament, throw everything in the garbage that I just said if we're talking about practice, because it's a complete flip of the opposite. You need to consciously control your body in practice so that you can rewrite what your body already knows how to do, using that whole CPG upper lower motor neuron thing with the dopamine that I explained. But going back into the tournaments, you can't feel your body in the shot, so you need to pay attention to the bird. So even if you're a master of your own body and you understand the game really well, and you don't fall victim to nervousness and anxiety and get freaked out, or like any of the typical anxiety that gets built around the shot, even if you can handle that, you still have to go extraceptive to connect to a bird with smooth pursuit ocular movement. The very best competitors in the game can very easily get out of managing their state of being well because of what I just explained. And then the least experienced competitors in this game, if they can get to a state where they can control all that stuff, they tend to have more anxiety built up around pulling the trigger, or they just decide that that's what they care about more. And so that in itself induces anxiety. And when anxiety turns on, your brain will neurologically flip you into being extraceptive as a form of fight or flight response, which forces you into being hyper aware of a large field of view of your vision, sensitive to your peripheral, hyper aware to sounds, all of these things. That's where you get into the moment of being annoyed by people talking, annoyed by golf carts going past you, not being able to not see the gun. There's a neurological explanation for when you get in that moment. It's not necessarily your fault. How many times can anybody in here right now relate to the fact of like, I can't stop seeing the gun. No matter what I try to do, I can't stop seeing the gun. Because you're in the wrong emotional state. Your brain has changed biologically the way that your eyes are sending information to the brain to not allow you to see a small portion of your vision and exclude your peripheral, because it's thinking that you're about to get eaten by some animal in the bushes, and it doesn't want you to be ignoring everything in your vision. Literally, it is not possible for you to do it. So it's not your fault in that you're incapable of looking at the bird, but it is your fault in that you've gotten so extraceptive you don't realize how anxious, tense, and fight or flight that you are. And so all you really have to do is calm down. That's a super long explanation, but it's one of the most fascinating things about this game, and so I just decided to, because it's fun.